Send your story. darkwhispers061@gmail.com. Mr. Night Stories present. I longed for the nights where my mother would don an evening gown, punctuate every sentence of her lecture with the clicks and the clacks of her high heels as she strutted to the door, and leave a deep red imprint of her lips on my forehead before she allowed herself to be whisked away by her suitor of the night. Those nights are rare when your single mother works 12-hour shifts at the local nursing facility and comes back home to a long evening of drinking, loud television, and heated arguments with her children. This night was better than all the others because the universe had aligned the plans of everyone in the household to coincide, leaving me behind for at least 5 hours worth of quite alone time, something I rarely got. I was in my bedroom, my secret stash of snacks scattered all over my bed, and the one shared laptop we had in the house all to myself. I didn't know what I wanted to do first. Watch a movie? Sing along to karaoke songs on YouTube? Have a one-woman dance party? I settled upon watching a scary movie and turned off all the lights to set the mood. I was barely past the 30-minute mark when I heard the distant sound of snickering. For a few seconds, I convinced myself that it was just a background noise in the movie I was watching, but my reassurance faltered when I paused the film and still heard it. I was frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I just waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I slowly shifted my position. The bed frame creaked under my weight as I did so. I planted both my feet on the ground and paused for a few minutes. It was most probably one of my siblings who had come home early and was playing a prank on me. It could have even been one of my neighbor's kids. Whoever it was, I was a 16-year-old girl who wasn't taking any chances. I finally had the mind to scan the room for anything I could use to defend myself. I shared a room with 6- and 8-year-old girls. The entire place was childproof, and my best bet was a heavy sports trophy, but I figured that it was better than nothing. The snickering got louder and nearer. It was turning into chuckles. I didn't know whether I wanted to wait in here until I was found or do the finding myself. I took another long, hard look at the trophy in my hands and decided to wait. With each minute that passed, the laughter increased in volume and enthusiasm. It sounded like a child who knew his parents were heading towards his hiding spot during a game of hide and seek, laughing with the voice of an adult. Then, I heard the sounds of chairs being dragged across the hardwood floor. It didn't sound like it was with much purpose other than to clear them out of the way. A slippery, slobbery, wet noise followed suit. It sounded familiar, yet it wasn't one I had particularly heard before. Whoever was in my kitchen was slamming, ripping apart, and mushing whatever it was he had in his hands. I heard squishes and squelches, and I could only assume that it was some sick psychopath with a fetish for breaking into houses and mauling large animals. Whatever it was, he was laughing throughout. I was terrified. There was a stranger in my kitchen, laughing manically as he seemingly prepared himself a snack on the counter. There was an intruder in the downstairs of my house, the place where I had left my cell phone. I turned around and looked at my laptop, wondering if the police would respond to emails. I decided to give it a try anyway, and tiptoed back to my bed. My trembling fingers struggled to type slowly and quietly, but I eventually managed to send an email and post for help on social media. An excruciating 7 minutes passed by until I heard someone pull up on the driveway. It didn't sound like the police. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps running up to the front door, frantically jamming a key into the keyhole and swinging the door open. The laughter stopped for a brief second before it turned into a roaring guffaw. A shriek and an ear-piercing scream penetrated the silence of the neighborhood, and whoever produced it turned around and ran towards the street, taking their screams with them. The manic laughter followed suit, and I finally dared to run to the bedroom window. I saw my sister running down the street while screaming, trying to attract as much attention as she could, and by the looks of it, she was succeeding. Running in the opposite direction was a naked man covered in a massive amount of blood that I had only seen before on television. He was still roaring with laughter as he disappeared out of sight. I watched out of the window as a posse gathered just outside my house. My sister hadn't stopped screaming. I realized that she wasn't just trying to attract attention, but she was actually hysterical, and I did not want to go downstairs and greet whatever had brought my sister to such a state. The crowd grew larger as the flashing red and blue lights arrived, and footsteps stormed into my house. I heard curses and retches downstairs before someone finally called out. All I could manage to produce at first was a squeak. A female officer appeared in my doorway and asked me if I was all right. She told me to follow her with my eyes closed. Great advice for a rebellious teenager. I noticed her grasp become tighter as we reached the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't help treating myself to a peek. Through squinted eyes, I saw the dismembered body parts of my mother neatly arranged beside her decapitated head on the kitchen counter. I passed out. 47 minutes. That was how long I had spent listening to my mother being torn into, ripped apart, mutilated, and eaten. The person responsible for that ran straight to his nursing facility, straight to his bedroom, and straight into bed. He laughed as they restrained him to his bed. He laughed as he was taken away in cuffs. He laughed as he was locked up in a cell. He laughed as he made eye contact with me in the courtroom as his sentence was being announced. I won't be surprised if he was still laughing when they strapped him to the chair. He will never laugh again, nor will my mother. I was home alone one night back in 2009. My parents were out on their weekly date nights. One of those had one too many at dinner and passed out in the movie theater kind of dates. Anyways, I had just returned from my afternoon jog. Being a hot August day, I had worked up quite a sweat on my run, so I decided to take a cold shower and clean up a bit. My house doesn't have air conditioning and was quite stuffed up, so I decided to open a few windows to circulate the airflow within the house. I can remember opening a window in the kitchen, 2 windows across from each other in the living room, and 1 window in the basement. I knew I was going to be spending my evening down there watching movies since it was much cooler. I had my shower, got dressed, and went downstairs to make myself some dinner. I took my dinner down to the basement and flicked on Netflix to start my binge-filled night of new shows. I do not recall falling asleep, but I must have passed out not long after eating my food and lying down. When I woke up, it was dark outside. The only light being cast into the basement was from the dimly lit TV screen. It was now freezing in the basement. I could feel a cold breeze circulating the room from having the window open for too long. I got up and walked over to the light switch that was located at the bottom of the stairs. I closed the window, then went back to turn off the TV, grab my dishes, and head upstairs. When I got upstairs, all the lights were off, indicating that my parents were still not home from their date. I cleaned the dishes, put them in the dishwasher, and closed the window above the sink. Just before I went to go up to my room for the night, I remembered that the windows in the living room were still open. I walked over to close the one window by the TV, then over to the next, which was located by the front porch. I noticed that my mom's vase with fake flowers was knocked off the table in front of the window, and the flowers were sprawled out across the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe there was a strong breeze and the curtains had tipped it over. I closed the window and started picking up the flowers. As I was cleaning, I heard a faint squeaky sound. What I could only imagine was a door handle being twisted. I listened as hard as possible. Following the squeak of the handle was a creak in the hallway floor upstairs. A pain shot from my stomach to my chest, and I froze. What seemed like an eternity of being bent over with my one hand holding the vase and the other clutching the flowers. I slowly stood up. I looked out the front window to check the driveway for my parents' car, hoping it was one of them upstairs. The driveway was empty. My heart sank. I quickly but quietly put the vase and flowers down on the table and silently began walking over to the bottom of the stairs to look up. As I got closer to the stairs, I heard 2 more creaks on the floor, which caused me to stop dead in my tracks. I waited, listening. Nothing. I was now only a few steps from the stairs. I took those last few steps and put one hand on the railing. I peeked around the corner and only saw darkness, I didn't know what to do. Do I flick on the lights and let the potential intruder in my house know that I'm coming upstairs? Do I leave and go to a friend's house? Do I call my parents? Do I grow a pair and just go upstairs? I decided to turn my phone on silent and go to the kitchen to text my dad, making sure I was close to the back door for an easy getaway. He said, "It's an old house. It's just settling after a really hot day." I told him about the sound of the door handle twisting. He just assumed there was an open window upstairs, and the wind was knocking a door against the frame. Was that it? Could it just be a window that was left open? I felt a huge chunk of my anxiety start to fade after talking with my dad, so I decided to grab a glass of water and head on up the bed. I flicked on the lights for the stairs and started making my way up, but slowly, a tiny knot in my stomach from before. I got to the top of the stairs and noticed that all of the doors were wide open, except for mine. My parents' room and spare bedroom were on the left, and the den and my room were on the right, with the bathroom at the end of the hallway. Though, as my dad had predicted, my door was cracked just enough that a breeze could be making it hit the frame. It being as hot as it was today, it wasn't unusual for my mom to open all the doors and windows upstairs. I exhaled a sigh of relief, now fully confident that my dad was right. I turned on the lights to my room, did a quick look around, and walked over to my nightstand to put my water beside my laptop, then went off to the bathroom to get ready for bed. As I lay in bed trying to get sleepy, I was watching my favorite reruns of Seinfeld on my laptop. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a sound of something slowly scraping my closet door. I quickly flicked on the light beside my bed. My closet door was cracked open ever so slightly. Questions started racing through my head. Was it open the whole time? Was it closed when I came in? I was positive that it was closed when I came in. Before I even had time to rationalize my thoughts, I heard the most disturbing, creepy, quiet, sinister laugh I've ever heard in my life. No horror movie could ever replicate the sound I just heard. As soon as I slid my laptop off my legs, the closet door burst open, and someone was standing in the closet. My clothes were partially covering their body and face. I looked closer, and there was the most sickly, palest, dirtiest woman I have ever seen. For the split second that I saw her in horror, the image was burned into my brain forever. She had no shoes on her disgusting, dirt-stained feet. Her skin was sickeningly white with cuts, and dried blood from her face, down her arms, all the way to her legs. She was wearing what I assume used to be a white nightgown, was now a discolored mess of dirt, blood, and who knows what else. Her gray, blue-veined, sunken-in face closely resembled a decaying skeleton. The rest of her face was hidden by my clothes. She asked in a quiet, grumbling, raspy voice, "Have you seen my baby?" That was enough for me to grab my phone and run. As soon as I was halfway out my bedroom door, I heard her shriek, "Give me back my baby!" and clothes hangers thrashing around behind me. I ran as fast as I could to the upstairs bathroom and locked the door. It was only a second later that I heard a huge crash against the door, along with the woman screaming in a devilish tone demanding I return her baby to her. I called 911, and the operator assured me the police would be there as fast as they could. I jammed my feet against the door and held my back against the sink, trying my hardest to make sure the door stayed closed. The woman would not let up, though. Her shrieks turned into low, demon-like grunts, and her banging on the door turned into heavy bodily blows. With what seemed like an eternity, I heard a heavenly sound. I heard the police call out that they were entering the residence. I yelled at the top of my lungs that I was upstairs. All I could hear next was a mixed commotion of the officers yelling and the woman growling. The officers ended up pepper spraying the woman, and it took 3 of them to be able to force her to the ground. She was yelling in a possessed-like state the entire time. I did not come out of the bathroom until the cops assured me she was out of the house. The cops told me she was likely on drugs or an escaped mental patient from the next county over. I tried telling them that she sounded like she was possessed or something, but they chalked it up to the woman just needing her medication. My parents arrived home shortly after I gave my statements to the police. We moved out of that house a month later. That was one night I was home alone that sadly I will never forget. This story takes place when I was 22 years old. I had just gotten home from a long night of stocking shelves at my local grocery store. I worked the closing shift, so I usually got home around midnight. I shared a cheap apartment with my roommate, Mark. We weren't in the best of neighborhoods, but I just felt lucky to have a place to live that wasn't my parents' basement. I threw my jacket on the coat rack next to the front door and walked into the kitchen to rummage through the fridge for something to eat. I had just pulled a frozen burrito out of the freezer when I noticed something weird. My bedroom door had been slightly open when I walked by the hallway. I know this doesn't sound strange at first, but I specifically remembered closing it that morning when I left for work. I like my privacy, so I always remember to shut my door when I leave for the day. I stepped back into the living room and looked down the hall. "Hello?" I called. There was just dead silence. Not wanting to let the fear get the better of me, I walked across the living room and flicked on the hallway light switch. "Mark, is that you?" I asked. Mark had always been a bit of an odd guy, so I couldn't help but think that maybe he was trying to play some sort of weird prank on me. Maybe waiting to jump out of my closet or something when I entered my room. When I finally got to the bedroom door, I gently pushed it open. The light from the hallway illuminated a large portion of the room. I looked around, definitely feeling the creepy vibes. There was no one there, and nothing looked out of the ordinary. Just the usual, my twin bed, with my nightstand just to the left. I closed the door shut and walked back into the kitchen. I popped my dinner in the microwave and pressed the start button. While that was cooking, I turned on the television, ready to put on a scary movie to watch and relax. Suddenly, I heard a muffled thump coming from down the hall. At first, I thought it was the neighbors or something. They can be pretty loud sometimes, and it's not unusual to hear a loud bump in the night. But then it happened again, and this time I could tell for sure it was coming from down the hall. "Mark?" I called once more. The microwave beeped just then, and I nearly had a heart attack. "Yeah, sorry, dropped something," I could hear him say through the door. I'll admit, I felt a little better knowing that Mark was home. I walked back into the kitchen to get my food, and that's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Mark. "Hey dude, running a little late here at work. Could you please leave the door unlocked for me?" My stomach dropped to the floor, and a chill ran down my spine. I texted back, "Wait, you're still at work?" He responded only a few seconds later. "Yeah, why?" At that moment, there was another noise from the hall, and I looked up. The silhouette of a large man was standing there, holding what appeared to be a butcher's knife. I turned and ran towards the front door, hearing the heavy clunk of the man's boots behind me. He wasn't running. Instead, it sounded like he was slowly walking, taking his time. I didn't stop to look back. I ran down the emergency staircase and out into the parking lot where I called the cops. The cops showed up just a few minutes later. They went upstairs and searched my apartment, but they said they didn't find anyone. What they did find still terrifies me to this day. As they were searching the apartment, the cops found a note left on the kitchen table, held under a salt shaker. On that note, only one word was written: soon. I was 19 at the time, and I was home visiting my parents and grandmother on Christmas break from college. My little insight on my parents' and grandmother's house is that it is a 2-story home, and it's not abnormally old for a house, maybe around 50 years old at this time, maybe a tad bit older than that. I don't know of any dark history on the land at all, other than my grandfather passing away in my grandmother's room back in '99 with lung cancer. It wasn't a surprise. The hospital let him go home to die in peace, and we all knew it was coming. He had a great life, so nothing sinister that I know of. Anyway, my parents, sister, and grandmother were all out doing something. I can't remember what exactly they were doing in town. So they asked me to stay at the house to feed the dogs. My grandmother has like 10 dogs because after my grandfather passed, all she's really done is try to fill a void. which is understandable in a way, but seriously, she has way too many fucking dogs. I agreed I would stay at the house for them. I'm a homebody anyway, and don't really like being around crowds, so I kinda looked forward to being alone by myself with satellite TV. My grandmother and my room were on the main floor, while my parents and my sister's room were upstairs on the second floor. My sister was 15 at this point, but she had this pink star-shaped doorbell on the outside of her door that's been up since she was a kid. It's probably been about an hour at this point since I've been alone. I was watching some documentary on the History Channel when I heard stomping around coming from upstairs. Now I've heard some footsteps upstairs before when I was home alone, and even with friends over. Yeah, kinda creepy, but I was kind of used to it by now. From where I was sitting, I can see the entrance to the stairs to the right. I didn't really pay any mind to it, so I continued watching TV. It was probably around 10 minutes ago since I heard the footsteps when I heard that fucking little doorbell go off twice in a row upstairs on my sister's door. Every hair on my body stood up. I muted the TV and listened for about a minute. Nothing happened. I told myself that the thing is a little old and might have some faulty wiring. Right before I turned up the volume, it went off again. Only once this time, like it was messing with me. I stared at the stairs, almost expecting someone to come down and laugh and say it was a joke, but nothing. I went up to the stairs and looked up at the stairway leading into pitch blackness. I was scared to turn on the light and illuminate someone standing at the top of the stairs next to my sister's room, but I turned on the light anyway, and there was nothing there. I went up the stairs and turned on all the lights and went up to my sister's door and pressed the doorbell button. It worked normal and there wasn't any problem that I could see on it. So I took it off the wall and took out the batteries and put them in my pocket, leaving the batteryless doorbell on the bed. I turned around and started walking out of the room when as I got to the door, the fucking doorbell went off again. Chills instantly went down my spine, and I felt a presence I've never felt in that house before. I went downstairs trying not to freak out and felt the batteries moving around in my pocket. It went off again several times in a row before abruptly stopping mid-ring. I thought that maybe if I ignore it, that it will go away. So I thought I would watch something cheery. I found a SpongeBob marathon. It has been probably around an hour since the doorbell incident, and I've nearly forgotten about the whole thing when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black mass the shape of a huge dog. Now my grandma only owns Shih Tzus and a Chihuahua, so there isn't anything taller than my knee in the house. But this black sort of transparent mass was huge, like a big-ass wolf. It went from the hallway behind the couch, then sprinting out the back door, causing the big, heavy back door to fly open and slam into the wall. I jumped so high out of the chair, and every dog in the house was flipping shit. Not like the annoying bark they do when someone strange is around, but more like they were terrified. I jumped up and ran outside to try to see this mass, but only catching the ass end of it running into our workshop. We had a motion light out there, and it triggered the light on in front of the shop. The shop was obviously not in use, so the light inside was off, and all you can see from the outside is the door slightly open, but nothing but darkness from inside. After this thing ran inside the shop, it turned around and stared at me through the slightly open door. Now this is what gave me nightmares for a long time. When it stared at me, it had this yellow glow emitting from its eyes. That stopped me dead in my tracks. I no longer wanted to pursue this thing. I was 19 at the time, and I was home visiting my parents and grandmother on Christmas break from college. My little insight on my parents' and grandmother's house is that it is a 2-story home, and it's not abnormally old for a house, maybe around 50 years old at this time, maybe a tad bit older than that. I don't know of any dark history on the land at all, other than my grandfather passing away in my grandmother's room back in '99 with lung cancer. It wasn't a surprise. The hospital let him go home to die in peace, and we all knew it was coming. He had a great life, so nothing sinister that I know of. Anyway, my parents, sister, and grandmother were all out doing something. I can't remember what exactly they were doing in town, so they asked me to stay at the house to feed the dogs. My grandmother has like 10 dogs, because after my grandfather passed, all she's really done is try to fill a void. Which is understandable in a way, but seriously, she has way too many fucking dogs. I agreed I would stay at the house for them. I'm a homebody anyway, and don't really like being around crowds, so I kinda looked forward to being alone by myself with satellite TV. My grandmother and my room were on the main floor, while my parents' and my sister's room were upstairs on the second floor. My sister was 15 at this point, but she had this pink star-shaped doorbell on the outside of her door that's been up since she was a kid. It's probably been about an hour at this point since I've been alone. I was watching some documentary on the History Channel when I heard stomping around coming from upstairs. Now I've heard some footsteps upstairs before when I was home alone, and even with friends over. Yeah, kinda creepy, but I was kind of used to it by now. From where I was sitting, I can see the entrance to the stairs to the right. I didn't really pay any mind to it, so I continued watching TV. It was probably around 10 minutes ago since I heard the footsteps when I heard that fucking little doorbell go off twice in a row upstairs on my sister's door. Every hair on my body stood up. I muted the TV and listened for about a minute. Nothing happened. I told myself that the thing is a little old and might have some faulty wiring. Right before I turned up the volume, it went off again. Only once this time, like it was messing with me. I stared at the stairs, almost expecting someone to come down and laugh and say it was a joke, but nothing. I went up to the stairs and looked up at the stairway leading into pitch blackness. I was scared to turn on the light and illuminate someone standing at the top of the stairs next to my sister's room, but I turned on the light anyway, and there was nothing there. I went up the stairs and turned on all the lights and went up to my sister's door and pressed the doorbell button. It worked normal and there wasn't any problem that I could see on it. So I took it off the wall and took out the batteries and put them in my pocket, leaving the batteryless doorbell on the bed. I turned around and started walking out of the room, when as I got to the door, the fucking doorbell went off again. Chills instantly went down my spine, and I felt a presence I've never felt in that house before. I went downstairs trying not to freak out, and felt the batteries moving around in my pocket. It went off again several times in a row before abruptly stopping mid-ring. I thought that maybe if I ignore it that it will go away. So I thought I would watch something cheery. I found a SpongeBob marathon. It has been probably around an hour since the doorbell incident, and I've nearly forgotten about the whole thing when out of the corner of my eye I saw a black mass the shape of a huge dog. Now my grandma only owns Shih Tzus and a Chihuahua, so there isn't anything taller than my knee in the house. But this black sorta transparent mass was huge, like a big-ass wolf. It went from the hallway, behind the couch, then sprinting out the back door, causing the big heavy back door to fly open and slam into the wall. I jumped so high out of the chair, and every dog in the house was flipping shit. Not like the annoying bark they do when someone strange is around, but more like they were terrified. I jumped up and ran outside to try to see this mass, but only catching the ass end of it running into our workshop. We had a motion light out there, and it triggered the light on in front of the shop. The shop was obviously not in use, so the light inside was off, and all you can see from the outside is the door slightly open, but nothing but darkness from inside. After this thing ran inside the shop, it turned around and stared at me through the slightly open door. Now this is what gave me nightmares for a long time. When it stared at me, it had this yellow glow emitting from its eyes. That stopped me dead in my tracks. I no longer wanted to pursue this thing. I was sitting on the couch playing with my Xbox and drinking my bottle of soda, having the best time of my life. You're probably wondering what I'm going on about, but I was home alone for the first time. I was 14, and you probably think I'm weird at 14 being excited about being home alone. But my mom was overprotective of me and brought me everywhere with them. My dad was finally able to get my mother out of the house on a date, which means I was able to be home alone for the first time. I then heard a knock on the door. Must have been the pizza guy my dad had called for me. I grabbed the $20 my dad left and opened the door thinking it would be the pizza guy. But instead, I saw a man wearing a black hoodie, ripped jeans, and a dirty beard. You need something, sir?" He smiled and finally spoke. I'm wondering if I could use your phone. Please, I need to use it." I didn't know what to say to this man. He was making me uncomfortable, and I didn't trust this guy at all. "Sorry, sir. My parents aren't home, and I'm not allowed to have strangers in the house." Looking back, that was the dumbest thing I could have said. I should have just lied and said they were home, but I was so creeped out by this guy and wanted him gone. His smile faded away, and he said, "Okay, then the kid gets all be going now." He then left, and I slammed the door shut, happy it was over and he was gone. I went back to playing my Xbox, but after a while I started to get hungry. I wondered why the pizza hasn't shown up yet. I decided to make myself a sandwich while I waited for the pizza to arrive, but when I went to grab the bread, I heard glass shatter. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. I eventually decided to check it out. It came from the back door, and it had a hole smashed through the glass of the door. An arm was coming through, trying to grab the door handle to open the door. I couldn't get a good look at the person, so I screamed at them to leave. The person started to laugh, so I ran away to grab a phone and call for help. I grabbed the phone and slammed in 911 and waited for the operator to pick up. And when they finally picked up, I was panicking and told them everything that was going on, that I almost forgot to breathe. The operator called me down and told me to find somewhere to hide. I ran to my room and locked the door. The operator asked if I had a weapon. I looked around and found a baseball bat, so I grabbed it. Knowing if he got in, I would have to use it to defend myself. I then heard the man start, "Come out, kid. I want to play." I was shitting myself at this point. I just wanted to be with my parents right now. The one time I'm left home alone, this happens. I heard the person slamming and breaking things, trying to find me. He even started screaming. I wanted to cry at this point until I heard his footsteps getting closer and closer to my door. I saw the doorknob move, and he started to scream when it wouldn't open. Then he started to slam on the door. "Let me in, you son of a bitch!" I held my bat up ready to defend myself. He started slamming on the door. I dropped the phone on the ground, and I was sweating heavily until he finally broke the door down. "Please, just take whatever you want." He started to get closer to me, and when he did, he pulled a bloody knife out of his pocket. "Please, please, just leave me be." He started to laugh menacingly. He held the knife up ready to stab me, and I knew what to do and swung the bat. I ended up hitting him in the head. He dropped to the ground, and I just kept beating him over and over. And when I finally stopped, blood was all over his face and on the end of the bat. I didn't even notice the sirens outside when the police came in. I ran out to them crying. They ended up taking the man away. They also found out he murdered the pizza man, and that's why he didn't show up. That's why there was blood on the knife. Knowing I was that close to death terrifies me. And I don't think I'll ever be home alone again. When I got home, my roommate was acting weird. I asked him what was wrong, but he said, "Nothing," as he looked around nervously. I'd just gotten home from a lunch date, and he was getting ready to leave for his afternoon shift, but he was frazzled. Something was definitely wrong. He left, and the house was quiet. Soon I'd have to go to bed and sleep before I went to work a night shift. For now, I plopped down on the couch. I wanted to watch something on my phone, but as I scrolled through the options, I couldn't find anything good. When I set my phone down, I finally noticed how dark and quiet the house was. I felt something scratchy next to my hand and jumped, my blanket from when I was a kid. My mom had dropped it off for a reminder of home. Man, I needed to calm down. I relaxed and took in my surroundings. The scratchy blanket, the rough texture of the old couch, the tick-tock sound of the nearby clock, the scratchy sound on the wall behind the couch. I jumped up again and looked behind the couch. Nothing. I was going to sock my roommate on the arm later for freaking me out. Once again I calmed down and took it all in as I drifted off. The ticking clock, the scratchy blanket, rough couch, the hand scratching my back. I just drifted into... I was shocked awake, but I was too freaked out to move. It felt like rough, lanky fingers gently scratching on my upper back. When I tensed up, I felt the fingers tense up. I finally rolled quickly off the couch, and I swear I could see a huge, dark hand moving fast out of the corner of my eye. I emboldened myself and madly tore into the cushions. Nothing. It's gotta be my imagination, right? I made myself sit down on the other side of the couch. Something tried to grab my freaking hand. This time I flicked open my pocket knife and wielded it over my head like a madman as I ripped away the cushions. Nothing. I grabbed my blanket and yanked it up. Nothing. As my adrenaline surged, I stomped off to my room, still clenching the blanket. I collapsed into bed with my blanket next to me as I faded into sleep. I dreamed my blanket was coming to life and was rolling on top of me to suffocate me. I woke up. I could feel the scratchy blanket sitting on my chest, right over my heart, its fingers spread over me the size of a dinner plate. I don't know why it came to mind right then that my roommate worked in the research department of the local university's biology lab. I blinked as my eyes adjusted to the dim light and found myself staring into several pairs of tiny black eyes in the middle of a demonic-looking creature with several furry legs emanating from it. I tried desperately not to increase my breathing, as I knew that would make it react. I couldn't stab it without stabbing myself. Bird spiders, called that because they literally hunt birds, are normally huge, but with legs spanning 12 inches wide, this one was as big as they ever got. I guess I know what my roommate was up to lately with all the late nights in the lab. I couldn't hold my breath anymore, and my heart rate increased. It slowly lifted its fangs to strike. I swatted it with my blanket, and both it and the blanket flew into the corner. I grabbed my phone and shined the screen toward it. I saw the blanket move. I hopped up into a crouched position and lunged at it. I rained down blows on the blanket. It was screeching, "Die, you freak!" After a while, I collapsed against the wall, hyperventilating but never taking my eyes off the blanket. Was that thing moving? I couldn't believe it. I saw furry legs clawing their way out of the wool cloth. I grabbed the thing and yelled, "Die already!" as I hurled it out the open window. Both it and the blanket landed in my barbecue pit in the yard. Perfect. I ran outside with a lighter and lighter fluid, angrily laughing like a madman. The coals in the pit were old and used, but should work. I saw furry legs trying to claw out of the pit, but retracted quickly as I doused it in fluid. When I stuck the lighter to it, it lunged at me to bite, but I was ready and stabbed it with a poker with my other hand. The fire roared with a whoosh, and wouldn't you know it, that thing screamed like a banshee. The blanket burned too. Sorry, Mom. I grabbed a spike-tipped tenderizing hammer and smashed the ashes until there was nothing left. Now, as I'm typing this in my car and it's night out, I still shudder when I feel an itch on my skin. I'm outside a pet shop and the owner is just getting here to unlock it. He's got a bird spider that should be a perfect parting gift for my roommate as I move out tonight, trapped right under his pillow, the one he always lays on and adjusts as soon as he gets home in the mornings. After that, I'm crashing at Mom and Dad's place. This happened to me when I was around 10 years old. I never really told anybody apart from my best friends. I grew up in Scotland on a farm with my dad. After I turned 6, my dad started to develop arthritis in old age. He couldn't look after the animals, so I had to help out until we could sell them, feeding them ECT. I was a bit of a tomboy in some ways. I didn't mind bugs, dirt, mud, the dark ECT. I didn't get scared easily. I was the kid trying to scare people most of the time for fun. One day, my dad left me in charge of our land whilst he went to get his back checked since it had been getting worse. You're probably thinking he didn't care about me or anything, so before you judge, he has, and always will care about me. He said that I should stay inside and draw, do something creative. I was brought up speaking English. I never really understood why. Still don't, to be honest, so I couldn't really talk to any of the adults. Some of my friends spoke English. I just pretended to know what they meant if they did speak Scottish. Since I had an accent, people believed me. I just sat inside all day and drew pictures and did puzzles. It started raining and thundering. I jumped out of my skin every time I heard thunder. A while after the rain started, I heard a cow wandering around. We had 5 cows, 10 pigs, and 3 sheep. I put on my raincoat and looked outside for her. The gate and the doors to the shed where they slept had blown open. I eventually tempted her back to the shed and calmed down the rest of the cows. There was one cow that was a bit smaller than the rest. She didn't have a name since she was so young, only born a few days ago. She normally stayed with the rest of the cows and stayed warm. I could see her huddled up in the corner, so I went to see if she was okay. The rest of the cows didn't even care about her for some reason, so it was safer than normal to do so. When I was close enough to get a good look at her, I could tell something was wrong. Normally, she would jump and run up to me and lick my hand like a pet cat or something. She just stayed still, huddled up and shivering. When I was sitting next to her, I put my hand on the back of her neck and patted her to reassure her that she was okay, and that the thunder couldn't hurt her. She bent her neck around and looked at me. She didn't blink and her eyes didn't move. She just stared at me. She jumped up, pushed me out the way, and ran out of the open door. The gate was locked, so I thought she would run back inside when she realized it was raining. I ran after her but couldn't see her. I walked around the sides of the fence to see if there was a way she could get out. I was about to give up when I heard a rustle in the bushes on the other side of the fence. Spot? I nicknamed her that because she was just plain white with one black spot around her left eye. You there, girl? I asked. I leant over the wooden post and looked around with the torch. After a while, a small head poked out from over the bush and looked at me. It was so dark I couldn't see, so I pointed the torch at it. It was still dark. It wasn't Spot. I didn't know what it was. It looked like a black ball with black hair stuck on the top. Hello? I asked it rather quietly. Grumble, grumble. The thing in the bushes shook and jumped out. It had 2 skinny and bone-like legs, about a foot in height, no arms or face at all. I stared at it and tried to figure out what it was. It growled at me and started to run towards me. I didn't realize how far away it was because of the rain. It was nearly as big as I was. I ran home, slammed the door, and just sat on the sofa crying. My dad got home and I went to bed. I didn't tell him about what had happened with the animals or what happened by the fence because he didn't need any more stress. I woke up, washed, got dressed, and walked downstairs. My dad walked in through the front door with a sad look on his face. He had rain dripping off of his hair and his shoulders. What's wrong, Dad? I asked, plodding over to hug him. It's nothing. Just go back to your breakfast. I'll tell you later, Rose, he said, nudging me over to the table. After breakfast, my dad went up to have a nap, and I went out to put some food in the troughs for the cows. The gate was unlocked, but not open. I ignored it and carried on. I had my torch in my pocket so that if that thing showed up again, I could whack it with it, then run off screaming like bloody murder. I pushed open the huge doors and dragged the food bucket behind me. Grumble, munch, grumble at first. It sounded like a cat trying to meow and eat at the same time. Then it started to sound like snarling. I looked around and I could see the black ball off fur hunched over in the corner. I could see one of the bigger cows underneath it covered in blood. It didn't know I was there until I screamed, dropped the food and ran. It snarled and chased after me. I got to the gate and I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. I turned around and swung my torch around in self-defense. I sighed and wiped the tears off my face. I turned around and it was there. Its face nearly touching mine. It was breathing heavily and staring, I think, at me. Its fur hair was soaked in blood, and so was what was meant to be its face. I screamed and ran to the door of our cottage. Dad! Dad! I shouted over and over again until he woke up. I heard the thing's footsteps getting louder and louder as it ran up the gravel pathway. My dad opened the door and the footsteps stopped. I looked up at him and burst into tears. He picked me up and hugged me. He put me back down on my feet and patted me on the head. What's wrong, Princess? He asked me in a reassuring voice. I told him what happened, and he told me that he was sad, because one of the older cows died of old age. He called some people and they would have picked up the body without me knowing since it would upset me. I looked in some books and couldn't find any animal that looked even similar to what I saw. It was a rather quiet night, aside from some trucks passing by my house every half hour or so. I live in a rural area, so this is normal, so when one of the trucks pulled over outside of my house, I didn't take much notice. My house is surrounded by several acres of empty land, so when I say the truck pulled up outside of my house, I mean it pulled up outside of my gated driveway a good 50 meters away from the house itself. My parents were out for the night and told me they wouldn't be back until after about 1 a.m. It was roughly 10 past 8, and I was in the kitchen scrummaging through my cupboards for something easy to cook for dinner. I found some 2-minute noodles and turned on the kettle. I left the kitchen and went into the lounge room ready to find something to binge watch on Netflix for the night, when I finally noticed the truck outside my yard. At the time, I didn't realize it was a truck straight away at the time, as it was pretty far away. All I really saw were the headlights, and I thought it might have been a truck or car. There are always trucks pulling over outside my yard to check on something, so I didn't think much of it and went back to scrolling through Netflix. 10 or so minutes had passed and the truck was still there, so I decided I was going to go out and see if whoever it was out there needed help with anything. I grabbed my torch from the kitchen counter along with my pocket knife, just in case something was to happen. I walked out the front door and towards my bike, which was parked beside my house. I shoved my pocket knife into my pocket, jumped onto my bike and turned on my torch. I rode with one hand and held my torch in the other, pedaling at a steady pace towards my front gate. I got there in about a minute and put the stand down on my bike before hopping off of it. I turned my torch off as the headlights of the truck were bright enough for me to see. I walked towards the truck and saw that the driver's side door was open. I could hear the sound of music coming from the radio inside the truck. I called out, "Hello," but to no avail. I walked around to the side of truck and called out again. No answer. I continued down the side of the truck, calling out several times, but still to no avail. I was starting to feel a little creeped out and was about to turn to go to the other side of the truck when I heard faint footsteps coming behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks. The footsteps continued to get louder and louder as they came closer and closer until they finally stopped right behind me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my pocket knife, flicked up the blade and spun around to see. Nothing. There was nothing behind me, and as far as I could tell, nothing around me anywhere. Every single hair on my body was standing up, and I was starting to breathe heavily. I turned back around and, starting fast, walking towards the other side of the truck. I walked past the back of the truck and turned and almost screamed. Lying in a pool of blood near the back wheels was what looked to be the truck driver. It was a terrible sight. There was blood coming from just about every part of his body. He had several of his teeth ripped out and placed next to him. Half of his left ear had been taken off. His eyeballs had been gouged out. His right foot was facing the wrong way, and he had a 10 centimeters hole through his stomach. I turned around and started throwing up. I finished puking and just started crying, stumbling towards my bike. I heard loud footsteps running towards me, but I kept going. I got on my bike and basically flew back towards my house. I reached my front porch and jumped off my bike, ran inside and slammed the door shut before locking it. I ran for my phone in my room when suddenly the power cut out. I heard the kitchen window smash open, followed by loud footsteps. I ran into the bathroom, slammed the door shut and locked it. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. I held my breath and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. There was a cold silence for what felt like years when, finally, I could hear footsteps heading towards the front of the house. I let out a sigh of relief and dropped to the ground, exhausted. I lied on the ground for ages before I somehow fell into an uneasy sleep. I woke with a start, lying in a pile of my sweat. I was confused as to why I was in the bathroom, and then I remembered the earlier events. I looked up at the light on the ceiling and was surprised to see the power was back on. I was about to get up when I heard a light tapping on the bathroom window. I slowly stood up to see what it was. God, I really wish I didn't. Staring back at me through the window was the severed arm and head of my mother. I screamed as loud as humanly possible and ran out of the bathroom. I ran to the kitchen and pulled out the biggest knife I could find in the knife holder. I started walking towards the front door. I could see out the little glass bit of the door that it was still dark outside. I assumed about the time my parents had got home. I shoved open the front door and screamed, "Come out and fight me, you pussy!" I heard nothing. I waved the knife around and shouted again. This time I got a response. I heard a blood-curdling scream from about 20 meters from me. I ran full sprint towards the noise, screaming as I went. I saw the person for the first time, and he looked ... inhuman. His clothes were barely held together by a few strings, his few remaining teeth were decaying, and his entire body was filthy. He stared at me with the coldest look I have ever seen in his eyes. His face showed no emotion. I continued sprinting towards him, knife held out in front of me. He reached down and picked up a clever. There was fresh blood dripping from it, and he wiped it off with finger and licked it. Suddenly, my foot hit a lump in the ground, and I went tumbling to the ground. The thing looked at me and let out another scream before raising his clever. "Fuck you!" I spat, right before he brought his clever down towards my face. Right before it reached my face, I jolted up, sweating profusely. I looked around to see that I was in my bed. "Oh, thank God," I sighed. It was just a dream. I got out of bed, walked to my window, and opened the curtains. My heart dropped. Outside my window, staring straight at me, was the thing. They say your home is the safest place in the world. That when all else fails, you can retreat to your own personal sanctuary to relax and be alone. I don't know if I wish I were alone right now. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood. It's the kind of place where people only live there so they can commute into the city for work. What I mean to say is that it's not the kind of place anyone thinks about as a home. There's nothing special about mine or anyone else's on the block. It's not even particularly nice. They're just houses. Despite that, I like to think that I rose above this. I won't say that you could hire me to decorate a home, but I've watched my fair share of home renovation shows. And after living here for almost my entire life, I think I've brought my very own charm to the place. I will admit, it had a lot more of that warmth when my kids still lived with me. Most recently, my daughter Emily had moved away to a college out of state to pursue a Bachelor of Arts. Still, I had lived alone previously, and I didn't mind too much. It's just unfamiliar to be alone after so long. So that's how I know, despite what the police say. I don't feel alone. It started about 2 weeks ago, regular as anything else. I'd been lying in my bed reading a book when I heard a noise somewhere else in the house. Just some creaking floorboards. If I had been as paranoid as I am right now, I would have immediately thought of someone walking across the hardwood. But I chalked it up to the house settling and went to bed. That had to have been the first instance. Or maybe it was just the first time I noticed it. I mean, the house had made noises before, but it couldn't have been happening that long without me knowing. When I woke up the next morning, I had completely forgotten about the night previously, before I noticed a notification on my phone from my home security system. My daughter had pushed for me to install something now that I was living alone, and I had relented, but it hadn't been very useful so far. However, now the phone said something I had never read before. Someone is outside 2:17 a.m. I immediately clicked on it to see what had happened, that maybe something had fallen in the night, or one of my neighbors had come home late. The 30 seconds of footage was from one of my cameras pointing into my backyard, and it was dark. I didn't see anything obvious, so I chalked it up to a glitch and moved on with my day. The next morning, though, the same thing happened. I woke up to another notification saying, "Someone is outside 1:42 a.m. Again, there was nothing evident on the short slip of footage that the app had saved, so I thought that maybe my security system was glitched. This continued for another week before anything changed. After waking up to another, "Someone is outside" every morning, I had stopped checking the recordings. If the system was not going to record anything anyway, What was the point of even checking? I was debating even getting rid of the system and replacing it completely when I noticed something off in my kitchen. The door was open ever so slightly, the wind brushing the curtains gently. If I hadn't not touched that door in over 2 months, I probably wouldn't have even realized it. I locked the door quickly and went to my phone to check the notification from last night. Someone is outside 3:13 a.m. The video was almost the same as the others, a dark view of my backyard save for the dim light of the lamp in my living room that I had forgotten to turn off last night. That slight change revealed everything, though. The app was right. There was someone outside. Not just someone, but hundreds of people, all pushed close to each other to fit as many of them into my backyard as possible. They all were wearing different variations of the same outfit, a hoodie and a pair of jeans. Some of them might have been wearing jackets instead. But all the clothes were dark and covered most of their body, all except their face. You know, despite this all, I might have preferred that they were wearing masks. Horror movies prepare you for masks. They all looked directly into the camera. They weren't smiling or talking. They just stood there staring with those eyes. There wasn't that effect you find on dark cameras, the red eyes you see when someone takes a flash photograph of you, or the reflection you get on a security feed. All the eyes were dark, dead. Then the footage ended. I quickly went back through all the other saved footage, and at first it looked like last night was a one-time occurrence. But I double-checked and upped the exposure of some of the frames. The first night there was only one person, tucked away at the back of my fence in nothing but a hoodie and jeans. Every single night after, though, more people seemingly flooded into my backyard. They never moved and tried to stay as far away from my house as possible. Obviously, I called the police. I told them that I was being stalked or harassed and that people had broken into my house. They searched every inch of my house and couldn't find a single thing stolen or moved. There wasn't a single sign of a break-in other than the open sliding glass door that I had shut. When I tried to show them what the cameras had recorded, they said they couldn't see anything but that I could call them if anything else happened. The look the officer gave me when he said that almost felt like the kind of pity you give someone losing your mind. I couldn't sleep that night. All night, I could hear floorboards creaking and pipes moving. Even though I had locked the door to my bedroom, I felt like there was something in the walls and ceiling from every side of me. People shimmying through tight spaces and pushing up against each other. I even thought for a second that it might just be the house settling, but I was awake when the notification came this time. Someone is inside 2:57 a.m. When I clicked the notification to see what the app had recorded, it was just a black screen. But the audio had picked something up. It sounded like hundreds of bodies moving against each other, each trying to fit inside some small space. The bones breaking and skin ripping as the bodies squeezed themselves between each other was the only thing for those 30 seconds. The police never found anything inside my house when I called them again. They set up someone outside in case someone tries to break in, but I don't need them outside. It's the fact that they're on the inside. I don't know if I'd want another person in here, though. I worry that it's becoming too full. The videos are dark still, and I don't know which camera is recording them. I only have cameras outside my house. The walls are bulging now, and I don't know what to do. I have nowhere else to go, and I wish I were all alone. It was a rather quiet night, aside from some trucks passing by my house every half hour or so. I live in a rural area, so this is normal. So when one of the trucks pulled over outside of my house, I didn't take much notice. My house is surrounded by several acres of empty land, so when I say the truck pulled up outside of my house, I mean it pulled up outside of my gated driveway a good 50 meters away from the house itself. My parents were out for the night and told me they wouldn't be back until after about 1 a.m. It was roughly 10 past 8, and I was in the kitchen scrummaging through my cupboards for something easy to cook for dinner. I found some 2-minute noodles and turned on the kettle. I left the kitchen and went into the lounge room ready to find something to binge watch on Netflix for the night when I finally noticed the truck outside my yard. At the time, I didn't realize it was a truck straight away at the time, as it was pretty far away. All I really saw were the headlights, and I thought it might have been a truck or car. There are always trucks pulling over outside my yard to check on something, so I didn't think much of it and went back to scrolling through Netflix. 10 or so minutes had passed and the truck was still there, so I decided I was going to go out and see if whoever it was out there needed help with anything. I grabbed my torch from the kitchen counter along with my pocket knife, just in case something was to happen. I walked out the front door and towards my bike, which was parked beside my house. I shoved my pocket knife into my pocket, jumped onto my bike, and turned on my torch. I rode with one hand and held my torch in the other, pedaling at a steady pace towards my front gate. I got there in about a minute and put the stand down on my bike before hopping off of it. I turned my torch off as the headlights of the truck were bright enough for me to see. I walked towards the truck and saw that the driver's side door was open. I could hear the sound of music coming from the radio inside the truck. I called out, "Hello!" but to no avail. I walked around to the side of truck and called out again. No answer. I continued down the side of the truck, calling out several times, but still to no avail. I was starting to feel a little creeped out and was about to turn to go to the other side of the truck when I heard faint footsteps coming behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks. The footsteps continued to get louder and louder as they came closer and closer until they finally stopped right behind me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my pocket knife, flicked up the blade, and spun around to see nothing. There was nothing behind me, and as far as I could tell, nothing around me anywhere. Every single hair on my body was standing up, and I was starting to breathe heavily. I turned back around and starting fast, walking towards the other side of the truck. I walked past the back of the truck and turned and almost screamed. Lying in a pool of blood near the back wheels was what looked to be the truck driver. It was a terrible sight. There was blood coming from just about every part of his body. He had several of his teeth ripped out and placed next to him. Half of his left ear had been taken off. His eyeballs had been gouged out. His right foot was facing the wrong way, and he had a 10 centimeters hole through his stomach. I turned around and started throwing up. I finished puking and just started crying, stumbling towards my bike. I heard loud footsteps running towards me, but I kept going. I got on my bike and basically flew back towards my house. I reached my front porch and jumped off my bike, ran inside and slammed the door shut before locking it. I ran for my phone in my room when suddenly the power cut out. I heard the kitchen window smash open, followed by loud footsteps. I ran into the bathroom, slammed the door shut and locked it. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. I held my breath and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. There was a cold silence for what felt like years when, finally, I could hear footsteps heading towards the front of the house. I let out a sigh of relief and dropped to the ground, exhausted. I lied on the ground for ages before I somehow fell into an uneasy sleep. I woke with a start lying in a pile of my sweat. I was confused as to why I was in the bathroom, and then I remembered the earlier events. I looked up at the light on the ceiling and was surprised to see the power was back on. I was about to get up when I heard a light tapping on the bathroom window. I slowly stood up to see what it was, and God, I really wish I didn't. Staring back at me through the window was the severed arm and head of my mother. I screamed as loud as humanly possible and ran out of the bathroom. I ran to the kitchen and pulled out the biggest knife I could find in the knife holder. I started walking towards the front door. I could see out the little glass bit of the door that it was still dark outside. I assumed about the time my parents had got home. I shoved open the front door and screamed, "Come out and fight me, you pussy!" I heard nothing. I waved the knife around and shouted again. This time I got a response. I heard a blood-curdling scream from about 20 meters from me. I ran full sprint towards the noise, screaming as I went. I saw the person for the first time and he looked ... inhuman. His clothes were barely held together by a few strings, his few remaining teeth were decaying, and his entire body was filthy. He stared at me with the coldest look I have ever seen in his eyes. His face showed no emotion. I continued sprinting towards him, knife held out in front of me. He reached down and picked up a cleaver. There was fresh blood dripping from it, and he wiped it off with finger and licked it. Suddenly, my foot hit a lump in the ground, and I went tumbling to the ground. The thing looked at me and let out another scream before raising his clever. "Fuck you!" I spat, right before he brought his clever down towards my face. Right before it reached my face, I jolted up, sweating profusely. I looked around to see that I was in my bed. "Oh, thank God," I sighed. It was just a dream. I got out of bed, walked to my window, and opened the curtains. My heart dropped. Outside my window, staring straight at me, was the thing. It was the middle of the summer a few years back, and my parents were going out to play cards at their friend's house roughly 40 minutes away. Now, being the teenager that I was at the time, I decided to yank out the small amount of weed I had and take a quick hit before watching the NBA Finals. Heat versus Mavericks. Game 3, I think. I love basketball, but I guess this isn't important, LOL. Everything was going well, and of course I proceeded to get the munchies, as most people do. So I went to the McDonald's just a few blocks away to grab myself a double cheeseburger and junior chicken. And no, I didn't make him a gangbang. After enjoying my meal, I started my walk home. But this is where it all began, and it almost makes me sick just thinking about the events that unfolded before me in the next hour. I finally reached my street, and suddenly I noticed that on the other side of the road, there were a couple of men with their hoodies up. And of course, being as high as I was, I began to panic and walk a little faster, just thinking about every possible bad scenario that could happen, except for, of course, what was about to take place. The event that would change the way I feel about staying home alone ever again. I reached my house and punched in the garage door code to go inside, and with that, my curiosity piqued about the men, so I decided to turn around to see if they were still standing there. Unfortunately, they weren't. Instead, they had crossed the road and were walking toward my house. I closed the garage and began to panic, as any paranoid high person might do in a situation such as this. But to my surprise, nothing happened for the next half hour. I made sure all the doors were locked, as well as the windows, closed all the blinds, and decided to return to the basketball game and forget about the two people I subconsciously thought were after me. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door, and I sat frozen in my chair, wondering who it might be. Is it my parents? Is it one of my friends? Is it the two men I saw just 30 minutes ago who scared the shit out of me? Yes, it must be the two men I saw with their hoodies up, I thought. One more knock, and then another, and then one more, and finally the knocking stopped. Scared shitless, I muted to TV and just stared ahead, listening for any sounds that might appear out of the ordinary. But for the next 10 minutes, nothing. Too scared to watch TV downstairs, I headed up to my room and turned on my DS to play some online Mario Kart. The people were gone, right? Whoever knocked on the door surely wasn't going to come back. But just as I began a race, I heard a louder knock, followed by another, and then one more. I closed my DS shut and sat on my bed, frozen with fear. Why the hell did I have to get stoned tonight? Why of all nights is this happening now? What do these people want? Here my curiosity rose again, and I decided to look out my upstairs window to see who was at the door, since if there were people at my front door, I would surely see them as they walked away. Peeking ever so slightly out of the corner of my window there, I saw him, one of the two men I saw earlier looking around my house, and then he stared right at me, or so I thought. Perhaps just in my general direction, but he didn't see me. Oh God, what do I do? Obviously, I freaked out at this point, and I proceeded to grab the mini baseball bat in my room, like it was really going to protect me, and just sat in my room waiting for them to possibly break through a window and get me. But once again, silence ensued, and I was left to ponder what the hell was going on. Maybe he saw me, and they decided to leave? Or maybe they saw my fear and realized I was their prime target. These questions, along with many others, flooded through my head like a terrifying tsunami, and nothing could deter me from such thoughts. And then my phone went off and nearly scared me half to death. It was my mom, and they said they were on their way home and had left 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes, I thought. 20 minutes, they'll be home and I'll be safe. Thank God. And then, bang! Bang! 2 large banging noises came from my upstairs window, and I jumped like a petrified cat. Not knowing what to do, I had to peek out the blinds of my window to see what was happening, and not to my surprise, there they were, the 2 men just standing there looking at me as if to say, "Yes, we're here. We see you. We know you're alone." I didn't know what to do, so I snuck downstairs and went to the kitchen for some unknown reason. At this point, I didn't even consider calling the cops, as I was stoned and I was paranoid, scared shitless. And what could the cops possibly do at this point anyway? I was so lost and confused. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on my porch. Why were they on my back porch? Why? Seriously? The footsteps continued, and then they stopped. Frozen with the purest form of fear, I heard nothing for 5 to 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I walked over to my family room, closer to where the porch was located, and I heard a very muffled talking. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they were saying something. My parents will be home soon, I thought. Soon they'll be here and these men will leave. And then I heard them, clear as day. "We know you're in there," they said. "All alone, aren't you?" I could hear them laughing. How could these sick people be getting enjoyment out of this? This is fucked up. And then the most terrifying moment for me came when they began banging on the window in the family room, as well as trying to open the sliding screen door. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I was too scared to do anything. And then the garage door began to open. My parents were home. The banging stopped, and I opened the garage door as quickly as I could. I told them to close the garage as quickly as possible, and began freaking out, explaining everything about the 2 men who were outside. But then my mom asked me a question I didn't possibly consider. "Have you been smoking pot? Your eyes are bloodshot and you smell like shit." Facepalm, I completely forgot to put Visine in my eyes and to mask the smell of the weed. I was too caught up in what was happening to remember to cover up the marijuana, and my parents, being the anti-weed individuals they are, blamed everything on the weed. They didn't believe me, but I told them to look in the backyard to see if there was any sign of these 2 men. But alas, there was not. The 2 men never came back, and to this day, I always look over my shoulder when walking outside at night, and always have a sense of fear when I'm home alone, or just trying to sleep in general for that matter. This experience scared the living shit out of me, and I just can't believe it happened to me. This just happened to me yesterday, November 2nd. For context, I am a 15-year-old female, and for the last 2 weeks, I've been living with my grandparents. I was having issues with my parents. Now my grandparents were having their floors reinstalled so naturally, they went to one of those hardware stores to get the work done, namely Lou's. I catch the bus home, so I greeted my grandfather, who was leaving out to take care of some personal business, and then my grandmother. She was supervising the workers to make sure that they wouldn't damage anything, seeing as though she's extremely paranoid. About 20 minutes later, I had eaten and had just laid down for a nap when my grandmother came in to inform me that she would be going to the bank, which was 2 cities away in Westchester. She told me that the workers would be in the back of the house, which I knew because I could clearly hear the machinery and such coming from that area. My temporary room, dubbed the middle room, was exactly in the middle of the house, hence the name. There are 2 doors to enter my room. Through the door on the right that connects to the front of the house, or the door on the left that connects to the back of the house. My bed is across the room from both doors, but closest to the frontmost door, as the head of the bed rests against the expanse of wall by the front door. My dog's cage sits in front of the back door, and if you were to open it, his house wouldn't obstruct the door. However, it would stop any advance into the room, as an entertainment center and desk sits on opposite sides of it. Of course, I feel safe and turn my back to both doors as I rested on my side and listen to a playlist on my iPod with earplugs in, which is a big mistake. I'm in an unlocked room with middle-aged men in the house whom I'm not familiar with. About 20 minutes after my grandmother had left, there were a series of knocks at the front door of my room that scared me shitless as no one in the house bothered to knock. I realized that it was most likely one of the workers, and the reason why they had knocked. The back door obstructs entrance into the room, but my back was to it, so I didn't see them attempt to open it. Also, the front door was blocked by the heavy clothes that I hang on the hook nearest it. My heart sank to my toes as I saw the door crack. They had knocked hard enough to force it open. They didn't speak, and I sat there quietly, petrified and not knowing what to do. I'm scarcely 5'3", 130 pounds, soaking wet, and a girl. In addition, I was in nothing but a short nightgown, and I was defenseless. I wouldn't be able to fight off anyone, least of all a full-grown man. My dog is a Maltese, and he makes noise over every little noise, and he's only 7 pounds, but his bark is loud and low. He growled and stalked over to the door with his hair on end. The knocking stopped immediately. The person never said a word, but I heard their heavy, slow footsteps recede to the living room, through the dining room, then the kitchen, which passed by the back door, and back towards the rear of the house. I freak and lock the door in the front of the room, and block the back door with my dog's metal enclosure until my grandma got back. Turns out my grandfather had been across the street the whole time, and had anything happened, he would have saved me. Since I didn't see which worker it was, my grandmother stayed with me at all times while they finished the job and sent a complaint to Luz, in which she was compensated. I know that it was irresponsible of them to leave me alone with those men, but they are older, upwards of 60. That was one of the scariest things that ever happened to me, and I will never forget it. I live in a very typical English house built mid-1800s. Lots of weird and unexplained things have happened in this house, mainly to me. If you want me to share other stories with you guys, I will be happy to do so. Quick layout of my house: my room is in a converted inside garage, utility room / conservatory / little bathroom, only a toilet, to my left. Our stairs are behind the wall in front of me with the landing above my bedroom. Okay, so it was a close family friend's 21st birthday last night, in which she was celebrating it at her mum's house, who lives less than a 5-minute walk from where I live. All of my family went, which is basically me, my teenage sister, Jess, my brother, my mum, my dad, and my boyfriend, who lives with us. It got to around 11 o'clock when my brother started getting groggy and tired. He's only 6, and due to this being a rare occasion for mum and dad to go out, me and my sister decided to walk home with him so he could go to bed. It was pitch black outside by this time, and I had this awful feeling of somebody walking behind us all the way home. Obviously, whenever I looked, nobody was there, so I put it down to being dark and me being worried as I was the adult among the 3 of us. So we got home and my sister took my brother straight to bed. My brother likes us to wait with him till he falls asleep, so I told Jess to come back down once he had dropped off. It didn't take long, and around 15 minutes later, she was downstairs, and we was watching crappy English TV. I needed to get my phone charger from my room, and Jess needed a wee, so we both went at the same time while the advertisements were on for first dates. So she goes to open the bathroom door, but it was locked, strange as it's one of them that turns from the inside on the doorknob. But I am understating when I say this has happened 100 times, so we didn't think anything of it. Jess grabbed a butter knife and turned the lock back round, and it was forgotten about. At around 12:30, me and Jess decided to go bed, so upstairs she went, and into my converted garage I went with my little Staffordshire Bull Terrier Ruby. Nobody else had returned from the party at this point. Everything was fine, until Jess texted me saying she could hear voices in her room. I told her it was probably somebody outside, or even my brother talking in his sleep. He was in her bed that night. She said no, it wasn't that. She could hear somebody whispering in her bedroom. Lots of weird things have happened in here. It used to be my bedroom, but I'll leave that for another time. I told her to come downstairs if she was frightened, but she said she was too scared to leave her bed at this point and just wanted to text me until my parents came home when she'd feel safer. I said sure, so I was texting her when I heard her banging around on the landing. I thought, Huh, you should said you was too scared, LOL. I then heard somebody run down the stairs in silence. I asked her what she was doing downstairs and to come in my room. She told me she hadn't moved from her bed. I didn't want to scare her anymore, so told her it must be the neighbors even though my room is at the other side of the house. I knew it wasn't. I was terrified. When I thought whatever it was had stopped, my dog wakes up and starts staring at my bedroom door like she could see or hear something. Her ears were really perked up, which she does when she's interested in something or caught off guard. Next news, I hear loads of banging coming from my kitchen or conservatory. I can't determine which. Things moving around and as if somebody was in the room, like nosying around through our stuff. I literally thought there was a burglar in the house or something, but then silence. I rang my parents and boyfriend at the party to come home, which they did. I was absolutely terrified. I really felt as though somebody or something was going to burst through my bedroom door any second. I was in my room alone playing video games like a normal introverted teenager when my parents walked in and told me they were going out. It was 7 p.m. at the moment, and them going out seemed correct. I was an only child, and I had pretty overprotective parents. This was the first time they were going to leave me home alone, and they gave me a list of things I needed to do to protect myself. They left the house and locked the door. I read my list and wasn't surprised when the first thing I saw was, "Do not turn anything but your phone and computer on." They had a security camera right outside my door, which led into a hallway, and I was instructed to make sure it didn't fall off or break. I opened the door and approached the camera, which stared straight at my door. I gazed upon the camera for a minute, feeling as if something was off, and decided to go back to my room to play video games. It was the middle of winter, and at about 7:40 a storm began. My parents called me to check up on me and to tell me that they weren't going to be home because of the storm. I personally wasn't too upset. I could make myself dinner and get ready for bed on my own. After about 10 minutes of my parents telling me they were worried their phone died, and I was going to be alone for God knows how long. I had to turn on my TV to distract my dogs so they didn't get scared. It was 8:30 now, and I was calling my friend on Discord while we were playing Minecraft. Normal stuff for people in 2012, when all of a sudden the power went out. My computer shut off, my TV turned off, everything I could use to make food was no longer usable during the storm, and all of the lights in the house went off. After that realization, I told my friend I had to go, and I started getting serious. I grabbed loads of blankets and pillows to keep myself warm, grabbed a flashlight and book, and put a phone charger into my phone just in case the power came back on. My phone was already on 10% by 10:26, and I finished my book. I got up out of bed to go quickly find another book to read. As I'm leaving to go get a book, I hear a loud crash coming from my room. My dogs ran in to see what was going on. I quickly followed, ready to punch whatever was there, regardless of my weak muscles. I see my dogs look at me with a puzzled expression. I couldn't see anyone in the room, but the window was smashed open. A freezing breeze flew in through my window and sent shivers down my vertebrae. I immediately grabbed my pillows and blankets and ran to my couch so I wouldn't freeze to death. After 15 minutes of cowering in fear, I decided to see what happened to my window. I entered my room and peered inside to see what could have happened. I stepped onto my bed to try to see if maybe it was strong rain that broke my window, but I felt a soft raindrop hit my arm and realized it was too big to be a raindrop, and the rain was too soft. I thought it might have been the wind or maybe something natural. Just as I decided to leave it alone, something crusty and strong grabbed my ankle and jerked me towards it. My face hit the window and my nose began to bleed. I look back and see an almost 6 tall man with only a pair of tiered jeans on. He grabbed me by my throat and whispered in my ear, "Let me stay." His voice felt like sandpaper rubbing against my ear. He let me fall to the floor while we both breathed heavily. I moved my mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the man yelling, "Let me stay!" The man grabbed a trash bag from the trash can in my room and emptied out all of the trash onto the floor. He began loading it up with everything that he could have found useful. My computer, my blankets, my jacket, etc. He left my room to go search the rest of the house while I felt almost paralyzed. I managed to roll under my bed and hide before he either tossed me in the bag or something worse. I checked the time. It was 11:02. Just then my phone died, ruining any chance I had of help escaping. I just tried to hold out for the night. I just wanted to survive this. I remembered giving my parents so much crap about being overprotective of me, and all I could do is hope I saw them again. My head was throbbing, and every sound felt so loud it could crush my ears. I eventually passed out. I just couldn't handle it. I was completely terrified, and I almost accepted my death. I woke up to hear the sound of the man snoring. I crawled out from under my bed and saw him sleeping on my bed, with the bag full of stuff he was probably going to steal from my family. I realized that the storm had stopped and quietly exited my bedroom towards my living room to see what time it was. I plugged the charger into my phone and saw the time, 6:23 a.m. I know my parents, and they'd probably be home as soon as they possibly could to see if I was okay. I knew what I had to do. I sneakily took the bag from the man's hands and hid it under my parents' bed. I quietly managed to unscrew my doorknob and switched it around so I could lock it from the outside. Just then, I was about to lock the door when it opened from the other side. I accidentally woke the man up. I looked up and saw the man tower over me, his skin sagging in a way that made me want to vomit. Then I saw it. He held a knife in his hand. Before I could react, he plunged it into my arm and pushed me aside without hesitation. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I could see the blood pouring out, but didn't have the strength to do anything about it. The man looked at the time and ran back out my window without my stuff. I don't know if he left because he thought someone was going to come home, or if he thought I would attract attention, but he left, and soon after my parents got back home. They rushed me to the hospital, and after I recovered physically, I told the police and my parents what happened. As far as I know, the man was never found, but I do know that he broke into my house, tried to rob me, and didn't manage to get anything. And I'm just happy I managed to hold out long enough to survive. I still haven't recovered mentally, but hey, at least I made it out alive. I must admit that I've never felt safe in my house. There's something strange about it. You know how you can tell when something is slightly off? Like you're a little anxious? It's almost like someone is watching you. It gets to me every time I sleep. I'm not sure what else to expect from a Connecticut farmhouse built in 1775. Anyways, last week my parents decided to take my two brothers on vacation without me. I had to ask why I was not included in this. Me. Mom, how come you're not taking me on vacation? My mom. Well, you're working at your internship. Me. But I can take a week off. I just have to ask my boss. My mom. Sorry, but the hotel is already only booked for 4 people. Next year you can come. I was furious, not only because they were going on vacation without me, but because I was afraid to stay alone in the house. I had to figure out how to take my mind off things while I was alone. Monday came around and they left for New Hampshire while I took off to go to work. The whole day I was thinking of things I could do. I only had to make it to Thursday and then I wouldn't be alone again. Clearly I was stressing out because one of my coworkers passed by and said I looked a little pale. Later I got back to the house and made myself some General Tso's chicken. I love to cook, so this calmed me down. After that, I figured I'd get to sleep early so I didn't have to spend that much time in the dark. I called my black lab over and fell asleep on the couch with her at my feet. Tuesday evening comes around, and at this point, I'm getting more comfortable because nothing strange happened last night. I was also thinking, I'm a 20-year-old man. I can't be afraid of the dark anymore. I stayed up a little later to browse Reddit and watching some YouTube videos. Around 10 o'clock, I called the dog over once again and went to sleep. Then I started dreaming that I was laying on the couch looking at the front stairway. A shadowy figure with faint red eyes appears around the corner, and I see him at the top of the stairs. He starts floating down the stairs and coming towards the couch. He looks at me from approximately 10 FT away and floats over the basement door. Imagine an old wooden colonial door with a fancy black metal handle, and then through it. Now I know this is a dream because I woke up and I wasn't even facing the front stairway. I saw that my dog got off the couch and was crying as if she wanted to go out. At this point, I was a little spooked because of the nightmare, and I was alone at night. So I took a blanket, threw it over my head, and took my dog out to pee. She came running in, wagging her tail, and then ran over to the basement door to sniff it. Oh no, not the basement door. Come on, let's go back to sleep. We both got back on the couch and somehow went to sleep. Wednesday, I asked some of my co-workers if I could stay at their place because I was freaked out of being alone. I got all negative responses. Some told me I was being stupid and there are no such things as ghosts. Some said they didn't want it following me to their house. But no one would let me stay over their house. Evening rolls around and I'm creeped out from the night before. I ate leftovers and tried to go to bed before the sun even started setting. I took some melatonin and covered myself in so many layers of pillows and blankets that I could hardly breathe, because clearly evil spirits can't rip them off or go through them, but they can go through wooden basement doors. I wake up and it's nighttime. I check my phone. 1:26 a.m. Then I hear my dog whimpering. I look over and she's at the basement door again. Oh no, I think to myself, no, please stop crying. Of course, my dog does not stop crying, so I get up and go over to her. I tried to get her to come back to the couch, but she kept going back to the door. I love my dog too much to stand to see her crying. I still can't believe I did this, but I took my phone and was going to open the door for the dog, even when I was alone, and I had a dream that a shadow figure went in there. I remember this so clearly. I turned on the flashlight, shined it at the door, and grabbed the cold black metal handle. My heart was beating so loud. I slowly opened the door and shined the flashlight into the basement. Phew, nothing there. As I'm about to close the door, the dog runs through my legs and down the basement stairs. I whistle to try to get the dog back up, but I just hear more whimpering. WTF. Now I have to go in there? I sat there for a brief second and tried to rationalize the situation. This must be all mental. I never actually saw a shadow man. It was just a dream. The dog might want to go down there because it was a humid summer night. It's cooler down there. Then again, we hardly ever go in the basement. It's only my house basement. I've been down there before. My brave, or stupid soul went down the creaky wooden stairs and turned on the basement lights. I see the dog over in the crawl space looking in a dark stone room. Here's a picture from another time I was down there. I always wondered what was in there. As a kid, I wanted to explore around the house, so I'd go in the basement with my dad to set mouse traps. Every we went down there, I'd ask him what that was, and he just said, "Don't go over there." Now was not the time to see what was in there, but I had to. The dog wasn't responding. I start walking over to the dog and she bolts into the dark room. Hell no, I'm not going in there. You'll just have to sleep down here tonight. I turned around to leave and I stared the ripped insulation falling from the ceiling. I can't leave the dog in that mess, but I'm not going into that room. I'll just shine the light into the room. I shine my phone light into the room and I see the dog, but not the back wall. How could this happen? The basement isn't that big. Come on, let's go up. The dog's run out of the room. Thank God. I turn off my camera flashlight as the dog runs up the stairs. Then I hear a, "Hey!" behind me. I literally jumped because I was supposed to be home alone. I turned around to see an old colonial woman with a white dress standing at the entrance of the dark stone room. She starts smiling and says to me, "I've been watching you since you were a kid. My husband built this house a long time ago. He's gone now, but I still keep the guests company." I was frozen in fear. There was no fight or flight for me. She continued speaking. "I'm not allowed out of the room in this form, so I hide in the shadows when I leave here." Slowly, she walked forward out of the room and faded into the shadowy figure I saw in my dream. That's when I started running up the basement stairs. I hear a muffled, "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you," from the spirit. I ran out of the basement and the light goes out. At this point, I'm breathing so heavy I can't even think straight. I got in my car and drove to the hotel that's down my street and stayed there for the night. I emailed my boss telling him I needed Thursday off. Later Thursday, my family came back and stayed at the hotel with me for a night. Yea, even though they didn't let me stay in their hotel. We had our priest come to the house Friday morning and do a full house blessing. When someone you love just disappears, it messes with your entire life. For me, it was my 13-year-old brother David. I loved my older brother so much. We were living in a small farm town in the Pennsylvania countryside. At that time, we were living in one of the oldest houses in town. Our house was built sometime in the late 1700s. On the night he went missing, I remember my parents weren't home that night for whatever reason, but back in the 80s, it was considered okay to leave your kids home alone. Me and my brother were both sitting on the floor in the living room, listening to the radio broadcast. My brother asked me to fill him a glass of Hawaiian punch. After I went to the kitchen and poured him a glass, he had completely vanished from the living room. I remember that exact moment as clear as day. I thought he was playing a trick on me. I played along, but when I searched every room in that damn house, not a hair was out of place. He couldn't have gone outside because I was by the front door the whole time, and the windows were sealed shut since by the previous owner. The basement door in the living room was wide open, the only place he could have gone. When I left to fill up his drink, it was shut. I was horrified of the basement as a kid because there's no electricity down there, and it literally looked like a dungeon. I yelled his name from the top of the stairs countless times, but he never answered. Even though I was 11, that basement still scared me. I remember that night, sobbing uncontrollably. And when my parents finally pulled into the driveway the next morning, I was still in tears when I told them about David. Mom and Dad checked the whole house. I then told Dad about how the basement door was wide open, and when he walked down into the basement. I remember sitting on the couch next to the basement door, hoping my dad would walk back up with David. But when Dad walked up those stairs, his face had gone completely pale. In his hands were my brother's clothes from the night before. I can't describe how horrified I was. He dropped them onto the ground and walked upstairs to where Mom was. I then got on the ground and crawled toward the clothes, exactly what my brother was wearing before he disappeared. I sorted through them. Everything he wore that night, shirt, pants, underwear, socks, everything stripped from him. I could hear my parents' voices from upstairs. My mother then came sprinting down the stairs and got on the phone with the police. My dad ran outside and into the field. When the police finally arrived, the entire police team thought he must have gone outside and got lost in the nearby forest, but I knew for a fact he was in that house. The police officers spent weeks searching the woods and fields near our house. The police checked the basement, but said there was nothing. They closed the case about a half a year later. The entire town assumed it was a kidnapping. I knew it was something to do with that basement, but I could never get myself to go down there. After his disappearance, life continued for our family. We turned David's bedroom into a guest bedroom. I hated how my parents did that. It felt like they were trying to move on. I was unable to. Losing David was a huge damper over my entire family. Something that would hang over our heads our entire lives. Mom's way of coping with the grief was just erasing all memory of him. I hated her guts for that. Every time I looked at that basement door growing up, I could feel something behind it. I remember one day when I was 16, I was putting DVDs away in the living room. I was sitting a few feet away from that door, and I smelt something familiar. The smell was seeping through the cracks of the door. It was what my brother smelt like. I got up and nearly ripped that door off the hinges. I ran downstairs into the darkness. The entire room smelt like David's old bedroom. It was pitch black, but I knew he was in there. I started screaming his name. I screamed his name for hours until Dad finally came down. Dad couldn't smell it. He thought I was insane. I remember I couldn't talk for weeks after that. Nowadays, the 30-year anniversary of David's disappearance is rolling around. I can say it's been a long 30 years without him. I'm now living alone an hour or so away from my childhood town. I had to get out of there as soon as possible. When I turned 18, I started looking toward apartments in town, and by my 20th birthday, I was out the door. My parents continued to live in that house. My mom developed stage 3 breast cancer about 3 years ago and was forced into a group home closer to the hospital. My father was given the option to move with her and sell the home, but he decided to stay there and continue farming. My mother and father had a tough relationship ever since I left the house, so Dad didn't mind the quiet. Later on, my dad fell off his tractor and broke his knee and is now unable to walk without a cane. He then moved in with Mom, then sold me the land for free and insisted that I moved back into that house. I wanted nothing to do with that house. I had to pay taxes for that house on top of my own taxes. I then allowed tenants move in. They were a young couple, late 20s. Of course, my stubborn old man was angry with me for letting a desperate couple live in the vacant house. They've been living in that house for almost a year now, and they called me up last week complaining about a decaying smell coming from the basement. By that time, I had learned to adapt from David's death. I told them I'd check it out the next morning. That was the biggest mistake of my life. I woke up early the next morning and drove to the house. It felt odd driving back there. Those fields, it all felt so familiar. I tried not to think about how scared I was of that basement growing up. Fortunately, my dad finally added electricity down in the basement. I pulled into the driveway. They were both waiting outside for me. They said it smelt like something was rotting down there. I had everything I'd be needing: asbestos masks, medical gloves, eye protection. I worked as an air duct cleaner a few years ago, so I have some background knowledge. I walked into the house and headed for the basement door. I'd never seen what it actually looked like down there until now. I opened the door and could immediately smell it. Something was rotting in there. I turned on the light switch. Ahead of me was an empty room. It was small, looked to be about 15 by 10 feet big. This basement had been haunting me for all these years. Seeing it with the lights on felt off. The walls were stone, except for one. One of the walls stood out. It was wood instead of stone. The smell was clearly coming from the wood. The wood was rotting. I walked over, and I thought the best idea would be just to tear the whole wall down. I started tearing pieces of rotten wood off the walls. Light started to seep into the other side. There was a secret room in the basement. I stopped, and in front of me I saw what looked like human flesh. I couldn't describe how horrified I was. I would rather go to hell than relive that terrible moment. I started smashing that wall with all the force in my body until it finally gave in. The creature in front of me, just the sight of it made me want to claw my eyes out. It was in a fetal position. The skin wasn't pale. It was white, and it looked like the flesh had been melted to the bones. The fingernails and toenails stretched halfway across the room. The worst part was that it wasn't dead. It was breathing. It was alive. "David," I said in a terrified voice. It slowly lifted its head and looked at me. The face looked completely mutated, but those eyes were my brother's eyes. It tried to speak. It tried with everything in it. That thing was my brother David. I had so many questions. How was he alive? What did he eat? How could he breathe? What the fuck happened? I kept the questions to myself. That was my brother in that basement. This whole time he's been in that fucking basement. I didn't say another word to him. I ran upstairs and out to my car. I opened up my glove box and grabbed my gun. By the time I got downstairs, David had stood up, dragging his long nails behind him. "Julian," he growled. I then shot him in the head. At the top of the stairs were the tenants questioning the gunshot. They walked down the stairs to investigate. By the time I heard them scream, I was already out the door and backing out of their driveway. I didn't shoot David because I was scared of him. I shot him because of how awful the situation was. That was 2 days ago. I've been driving ever since. The only time I stopped was to fill my gas tank. I don't know where the hell I am. Last time I checked it said I was in Kansas. I don't know what to do. Should I join Davis in the afterlife, or should I try to move on? The most sickening thing is not knowing what happened. What the fuck happened? I keep asking myself. What the hell happened? This happened in the Philippines, Pasig City, during my 6th grade. I was at the age of 12 or 13. What you will read is all according to my memory. My parents were always at work. My mother had a full-time job at a certain college while my father had a job in abroad. I have a brother. He was at the age of 7 or 8 around that time. We had a maid. Not sure if that's what she should be called, but I'll go ahead and call her that. It was around February, I believe, and we had upcoming exams around that time, additional information that our school starts from the first week of June until the 2nd or 3rd week of March. Whenever the people in our house know that exams are coming, they would always leave the house as I find comfort and concentration when I'm all alone. Our class starts around 6:45 in the morning and ends 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was Wednesday that day, and we would have our exams for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I immediately went home after class, carrying my wallet that had the keys of the house attached to it. I was known as one who hates noise. I would always shout whenever I read a book, and I would hear whispers, obviously trying to not distract me, but they did. Our house was a small one-story house, accompanied by other houses which had a 2nd floor. When I arrived, our maid was just getting ready to go with my brother to the mall. Not to be offensive, but my brother wasn't really a bright child, so he would always go to the mall with our maid instead of studying. That would always lead to nothing. And so, they left the house, and I was left with silence. It wasn't creepy since I didn't believe in ghosts. I appreciated the silence. I had no idea if there were neighbors present at that time. As I have said, our house was just one story. Coming inside, you just have to walk a somewhat straight line to go from the living room until you reach the bedroom, which is the only one we had. I took a quick snack before taking the books I would review. When I review, I had a habit of raising my right foot on the side of the bedroom's door and sway it left and right, creating sounds which I was comfortable with rather than voices of my family. Swaying it also gives me sight of the windows from the living room near the front door. I would study in front of the computer as I would have a lot of questions every time regarding a topic. I knew all of us had keys of the house anyway, so I didn't need to worry to ready the keys I had on my wallet to open the door for someone I know. An hour passed. The sound of the door annoyed me then, stopping my right foot from motion and leaving it placed at the side of the door. I decided to open Spotify and play a playlist dedicated for music made with instruments. No vocals were what I meant. As I was multitasking, kind of asking my classmates through Facebook regarding some topics while highlighting important parts in the book, I heard faint knocks from the front door. I decided not to look as I needed to pass the exams. I continued what I was doing, knowing that if they're a relative, they should have a spare key and just stubborn to take it from their bags. Another knock. I decided to look through the windows, still sitting on the chair inside the bedroom. There was no one in sight. I looked down on my book, thoughts running inside my mind, arguing with each other if I'm just hearing things. Deep in thought, there were now multiple knocks. They were louder than the previous ones, enough to make me realize that I wasn't hearing things. I closed my book and looked at the windows. There was no one. I got annoyed at that point. I opened my book again and focused until there was a loud knock on the front door. I felt someone was watching me, so I swiftly looked at the windows with an angry look. He was there. He showed no emotions on his face. He was like a statue, staring at me through the windows as if I was an unwanted visitor. My heart was pounding. My right foot won't budge, dropping. Slowly, his lips began to move, forming a smile. His eyes opened, widening as each second passed. I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream. If there wasn't music from Spotify, it would just be the silence and the stares we give to each other. I tried to shout for help, but I was so scared that I could only create a faint, screeching sound. I could feel my heart began to pound faster as he violently tried to turn the knob open. I tried to move from my seat, but I couldn't, as if I was paralyzed. When he realized that he failed, he stopped. I froze. I had no idea what he was going to do next. Was he going to surprise me with a key? Would he show me a family relative through the windows? Did he have another way to open the door? Luckily, I heard a car slowly drive into our road. The person looked at his right, assuming the car was there, and looked back at me, nodding with a smile before he hurriedly left. Quickly, I jumped to my bed and took a pillow to scream in. I didn't review much that day. Fortunately, I still passed. From whatever reason, I chose not to tell my relatives what happened. I would still look through the windows, expecting he or anyone wouldn't be there at all, staring back at me. It made me not to trust the windows in the bathroom either, as anyone could be watching even though the door of the house would be locked. This just happened, and I'm still shaking. I'm terrified that whatever that was might come back. I can't stop shaking. My fingers are quivering as I peck this out on the keyboard. Everything in my head is telling me that it couldn't have happened, that I was seeing things, or that it was a night terror. As much as I hate to admit, it had to be real. I know good and well that I am sane, but the fear I have borders on trepidation. I wanted to post this to Reddit and ask for help, if anyone knows what this might be, or if anyone has a similar experience. What I saw, what happened, please hear me out. Hear me out and believe that it is the truth, and that I am of sound mind. It stared when I was home alone, cliché I know, but hear me out. I was sitting on the couch in the den watching House. It was about 8 o'clock, and my parents, brother, and 2 sisters had just left to get dinner roughly 30 minutes ago. I, being sick with the strep virus that has been going around, stayed home. Just me and my 2 dogs who were in my brother's room just down the hall. I had just let them out 5 minutes ago and put them in there. So I sat, couch-locked with a bowl of hot soup and Dr. Gregory House. Everything was good. I'm sitting, watching, eating when there is a knock at the door. I really don't want to get up and answer the door, so I just sit there. Ignore it and it'll go away, right? I finish my soup and lay down. I figure I'll try to get some sleep. The minute I close my eyes, there is another knock at the door. I ignore it again. I close my eyes, resolved on counting sheep. Thud, 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 thud. Someone is pounding on my door. I lean up and look over the couch to see who the hell is beating down my door at this hour. No one. It is pitch black outside. I look over at the oven clock, 10:47. I'm pretty freaked out. I sink low into the couch to make sure that if there was someone out there, they couldn't see me. I watched the window on the door for a good long while, hoping to catch whoever was knocking. Not a sound, just dead silence. Maybe they saw that the TV on and left. I closed my eyes again, thinking that they had just left. Clearly, no one was going to open the door for them. Thud, 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 thud. Louder this time. I was torn from my sleep and thrown into a state of panic. Someone was out there, waiting. I turn off the TV, making sure it was as dark inside as it was outside. I wait for my eyes to adjust and slip into the kitchen, crawling on my hands and knees. I can't see the front door from the kitchen, so I hurry. I grab a knife from the drawer, expecting the worst, expecting the door to give way to whoever was pounding on it. Thud, thud, thud again, louder. I clench the knife in my hand as tight as possible, preparing for a fight. I inch over to the corner and peer out. Nothing was there. I watch the door, still nothing out there. The porch light is on, but I still can see anything. I need to call to someone, but I left my phone in my room, which is to the immediate left of the front door. I walk down the hall, making sure I'm not visible from the front door. Finally, I reach my brother's room. Maybe our dogs will scare them off, but the dogs aren't in there. The room is empty. I put the dogs in there. I know I did. Where the hell are they? Where is my family? They left at 6:30, and now it is nearly 11 o'clock. I close the door and quietly make my way back to the den. Thud, 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 thud. I heard the door handle shaking as the thudding continued louder than ever. I still have the knife, but I question its use against whoever is out there. I hunker down behind the sofa, waiting for it to stop. I lean up to get a look at it, but again, nothing. The pounding stopped, and it was silent. Nothing was outside. I get up, making sure that I don't break eye contact with the window for even a second. Making it past that door to my phone is my top priority. I walk carefully up to the door, hugging the wall so that I am not seen. I am 10 feet from my bedroom door. I step out form around the corner to see it there in the window staring at me. It slammed its face into the window, cracking it, sending web-like fracture throughout the glass. It fogged up the window with its breath. Its eyes burned bright yellow, and its face was unbelievably pale. Its mouth hung open crooked, full of jagged yellow teeth. Its mouth slowly turned upwards into a grin, but it sat there making no noise with its face against the glass. I froze. I screamed in my head, "Run!" But I couldn't move. Its grin grew wider as it gazed at me, feeding off of my terror. It pressed its head into the window again, cracking it more. I closed my eyes tight, shaking my head, regaining control over my body. When I opened them again, it was gone. I ran into my bedroom and slammed the door behind me. I ran into my room and set the knife on my desk next to my phone and ripped my phone off of its charger. I opened up the contacts and hit the first number on the recent contact list. Thud, 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 thud. The door is shaking violently. The phone is ringing. My mom answers. "What?" She sounded tired. "Where are you?" I was yelling. "I'm in the den. Where else would I be? It's 11:30. Quit yelling," she said quietly. I pulled my phone away from my ear to look at the screen, hoping to figure something out. "I thought you were out for dinner," I asked, my voice thin. "We've been back since 8:20. She sounded exasperated. I hung up the phone and put it back on my desk. The knife was gone. No, this isn't right. I was on the couch. I think I would have known if they came home. I slowly opened my door to peer out at the front window. The cracks in the glass were gone. I stepped out into the entryway and looked outside. It's dark, but no movement whatsoever. I looked out into the den to see my mom sitting on the sofa, watching celebrity news that she recorded. What the hell is happening? I didn't take any medication, so I was sure as hell sober. I look at the glass, rubbing my head. This all happened. Why is everything normal? Why isn't the glass broken? I walk down the hallway to my brother's room to talk to him, but he is fast asleep. The dogs come running out as soon as I open the door. The dogs weren't in there when I opened the door earlier. I pet them and let them out. I let the dogs back in and my mom turns to me. "Why did you call me?" "I didn't know you were home," I replied. She frowned. "Go to bed." I turned and walked back to my room, keeping a watchful eye on the front door. There is no way that I imagined this. It was all too real. There is no way that they were home. I was in the den the whole time. I pulled the covers up tight to my chest, hoping it would bring me comfort. It didn't. I threw the covers off and began typing. I remembered that Reddit had a place for things like this, a place where people could share experience and seek advice. What was out there was as real as I am. The fear I'm feeling is real too. What the hell was that thing? Why my house? Why me? Never in my life have I been paralyzed by fear before. Please believe me. Please help me.